Well, everybody, welcome to another reaction. Reacting to Nxthan animations. Well, he's doing, he's releasing a new video on 2024 Pacific Typhoon season animation. And so it's not Force 13 this time, but it's going to be a different one. So without further ado, let's go straight into it.
The 2024 Pacific Typhoon season wasn't what you would call a normal season by any
And of course, I will just pause as well, just so I can discuss.
means. Vietnam experienced one of their worst natural disasters in recorded history, whilst the Philippines directly felt the force of 6 individual typhoons in the span of less than a month. Yet despite all of this, the typhoon season scientifically falls underneath the climatological average. So how did the 2024 typhoon season really perform? How many storms did we actually witness? And how impactful were these storms on our own civilization? This will be answered in the 2024 Pacific Typhoon season animation.
I would say I do like his animations a lot. They're very different, and I like the icons, the detail. Look how much there is detail in this. It's already interesting. So let's just discuss and see what there is. So we've got the ACE timeline. So this is going to be this is going to be the accumulated cyclone energy, and it's going to have basically the intensity of the tropical cyclone over an hour, like certain hourly periods measured, and that's gonna and there's an equation that defines that what one ACE unit is then defined as higher intensities produce a higher ACE over that same time period, and you get more ACE, especially with longer lasting tropical cyclones. So it's going to have an ACE timeline which has been accumulated on seasonal and all the ACE added together against the base average of 1991 2020. It's not a great baseline time frame, but it's there. And we've got the monthly activity, which is going to be interesting because it's obviously going to show on the majors, the tropical cyclones, the different ones. We've got the damages and obviously the fatalities. We've got the time frame. We've actually got the Enzo state here as well, which is very unique. I've not really seen that before. And then we've got the extra details, like the ones that you don't think about is the tropical disturbance, the extratropical cyclone, and the remnant low. And it's going to be interesting because I've not really seen such detail before. Well, I've seen it before back in hypotheticals, but yeah. And there's the other ones, so tropical and tropical. Argon, okay, pause. I don't really track Argon or Winya, or Winya, I think it is, yeah. Winya. Category 2. This cyclone moved, or this typhoon moved so far east towards the Gulf of Alaska, which is very interesting. Yet it dissipated nearly just east of Japan. Maliksi, of course. And tropical depression. One thing interesting with early tropical cyclones is the way they have the tracks. There's almost a due south to north type of track in the early season tropical cyclones, regardless of the intensity. And of course, the modulating factor often there is just how warm the SSTs are in the Philippine Sea. Because then if you have that same track but you've got a different ST pattern, especially the OHC, then you've got now an environment which, even in the hostility that it could be, it still is able to strengthen. And of course, when you have a rapidly intensifying tropical cyclone in an environment such as high, like you've got a lot of fronts that are to the north, you've got a lot of divergent pattern, you've got a lot of outflow from a production. From a tropical cyclone that's going to be moving due north, but it's rapidly intensifying. You've got a much more likelihood of getting a more intensifying tropical cyclone in that situation. And so the thing is, like the South China Sea one was weaker. Is the thing is that it was in that high shear environment. It's at a higher latitude, and there's going to be dry air and other things. But the tropical cyclone is also making landfall very quickly. So these things result in often South China Sea having a weaker influence. There's a lot of times where you see a more significant tropical cyclone in the Philippines area, and then a weaker one just to the west, typically in the South China Sea. A new low pressure area on July 14th. Invest 99W, 03W, not classified, then remnants. Same time frame, just so within mid-June. Let's call it mid, rather than giving the exact time, mid-July. We've got 91 going through the Philippines straight. Buchoy, Karina as well. Of course, Karina, we know Karina gave me, I think, a Paparoon. I think this might be official bulletins. Yeah, this is going to be official bulletins because this does not have Typhoon Paparoon, which is interesting because this might be off the basis of JDWC analysis, which is not the official analysis of the basin, but it's just a analysis, which is often taken a call of, at least nowadays, it is much more. But of course, by reanalysis, I do believe it's going to be Typhoon Paparoon, which made landfall category 1, and then you have Typhoon Gaming, of course. But yeah, same sort of thing here. Northerly cyclone, the east, which is more intense than the western one, is not as intense. But in the Gulf of Tonkin, there's a unique thing with tropical cyclones, is that even though they're moving northerly, they rapidly intensify in the Gulf of Tonkin. This is a very weird geographical location, especially because of how westward it is. They do not feel the effects of shear as much, and so cyclones intensify right on the cusp of landfall, and that's what happened earlier this year as well. Yeah, and I believe it was Mesa gaming. Yeah, of course, here again, there's no category 5 Typhoon game here as well, which I obviously believe by reanalysis making it clear that is. And also, I've also made a short on it as well, category 5, I believe so. A lot of high alerts, like high alerts by the CWA, Taiwanese agency, for over like 700 millimeters of rainfall, which is very significant. And there's obviously the weird loop that it had. And the interesting thing with the loop is that the tropical cyclone is approaching the landmass and then moves away from the landmass and loops back towards it. And that's because of a mountain steering flow disruption, which is previously been recorded, and it was kind of forgotten up to this point until it actually happened here, where the tropical cyclone does this loop. And I wasn't really thinking about it either. I was thinking that it would probably make a complete landfall. And with some other tropical cyclones, depending on the conditions, they may fare much better against the Taiwanese mountain ranges, which is going to be influencing the tropical cyclone, especially if it's like a large one, like we're about to see later, like Congre. It does not really matter on the size of the tropical cyclone. Well, actually, no, it does matter on the tropical size of the tropical cyclone because it's much larger and it's coming from a different angle. That it doesn't. It completely goes through the landmass without weakening as much. Oh, 6W in early August. Maria, of course, this is going to be an interesting one. Subtropical, basically. There's no subtropical status listed here, but by the time it reached this point, I believe it became subtropical. The structure was more evident. And 98.5W is the other interest. And also do believe it probably re-intensified on landfall. Like it could have even been a typhoon, and that's on tin. These are the 4. Yeah, this is interesting because there's 4 tropical cyclones. Wukong, which is basically just a depression. Ampel, which just was the closest one near Miss. They have category 3, I believe category 4 tropical cyclone. Jongdari as well. Again, there's another unique pattern, like early to mid-August time frame. High latitude forming tropical cyclones are all moving due northerly. All of them, like literally, that's about 5 tropical cyclones. A very fixed pattern, and the current pattern, for example, that we have now, like in August, this actually does occur a fair bit. Like in the current pattern, there's already been a northerly forming tropical cyclone just to the east of a much more lower tropical cyclone, because that was a completely different basin origin, which is Dolphin. But we have a tropical cyclone that's forming to the east, and another area that's suggested to be forming at high latitude as well. So August does have this sort of unique time frame of tropical cyclone activity and moving in different directions. TC tracks. Basically, TC tracks defines the way the tropical cyclones are going to behave, and at least against climatology as well. So with early April, you can see it's much more different, closer to the Philippines. It's the same thing as the Atlantic when you have that closer to home thing, which is the tropical cyclone forming in the Western Caribbean, most likely, and then you have the MDR forming tropical cyclones, which obviously happen much more in August, September, and once it reaches October again, it's like it's not the same as the early homegrown tropical cyclone because it's closer, but it's going to intensify much more. So you get different environments on that same similar location, but the tracks will be different as well. Shan, I was just looking at Shan, I believe. Yes, I believe the analysis is different here, but yeah, rapidly intensified on landfall, and it basically collapsed immediately after that. Not so much of a landfall, but because its proximity is stalling, the influence is very significant. And it's a very weak tropical cyclone mostly until moving towards the landmass. Yagi, of course. Now you've got the main tropical cyclone here. Spent such time tracking Typhoon Yagi. And Lipai as well. I think Yagi on Hainan Island early September and re-intensified. So I believe in this event, Yagi probably re-intensified. Well, it made it first category 5 peak at 140 knots, and I believe re-intensified to 150 knots on secondary peak, and then it made a landfall, which it perfectly, I believe, is the Guangzhou. One of them names, I don't remember the exact name. It's very close to that, between Hainan and Guangdong province. Perfectly went through the strait itself without actually going through the landmass, the eye itself specifically, and the eye wall went directly over. That means the eye went directly over the Hainan Island city, which is on the northern tip in the center, which is unfortunate. It's just like bad location and timing of a very weird sort of tropical cyclone interaction between a strait. So it's sort of intensifying over land because it's right over the strait, even though there's mostly land. And so it weakened to category 3 intensity once reaching the westward side, and then it re-intensified to, at least by re-analysis, I believe, re-intensified to at least 120 knots on approach to Vietnam, which the northern part of Vietnam has a ton of islands. It has a ridiculously high amount of islands. So there'll be too many icon markers for landfalls, but of course they can't do that. They're just going to put one singular icon landfall here. And now use like the big tropical cyclone because of like, and realistically, there was not really a tropical cyclone like this in a long time, where you had a single huge impact on different regions. Regions that obviously don't expect it at all is the main thing here. A very significant tropical cyclone, the most intense landfall on Vietnam record, and 130 knots landfall on, and about 919 millibar landfall on Hainan Island. So very impactful, and yeah, but then of course the year afterwards you have things like in December, I can't remember the full name, was it Senya? It's tropical cyclone Senya, which is from the North Indian Ocean, but it went into the Western Pacific, which was much more impactful actually, because it happened during peak monsoon, which is Bebinka as well. So again, another tropical cyclone is very weak. Niguama has a lot of convection, like very high subconvection. X30, and it re-intensifies at least by reanalysis again to category 2. And it actually makes landfall pretty much into near the Shanghai region, which is very interesting. And there's a little a little bay area, or at least a little lake. I think it's a lake. I don't think it's a lake. I think it's just a bay structure. But the tropical cyclone is weakening, but then it goes over that really hot area of very small body of water, and then that singular area of that track going only for a couple of miles was enough to generate over 90 minus 19 degrees Celsius convection. Like, that's a very unique phenomenon. It occurs in Australia as well, the northern part of the Northern Territory and into Western Australia, because there's obviously some landmass, like water bodies, small ones, there after impacting landmass, especially because tropical cyclones go like due southwesterly. But here it occurred as well, which is quite rare in the northern. It's quite similar to Yagi actually, but of course much smaller scale, which is why it's really interesting, because tiny the landmass is. Some people think like, what if like a tropical cyclone went over like a lake or like a pond. Well, a pond's more ridiculous, but like a lake, would it actually benefit? And the answer is technically yes, it could. And that's very high latitude as well, 30 degrees north, at least for the Western Pacific. Like, towards here. Pulasan, I don't think there's any intensity here. Sulik and 93W. I want to see if there's any intensity update on Pulasan here. So I don't think the official bulletin, actually the official bulletin I think did have it originally, unless they scrapped it, but I don't think they have it now for Pulasan. Okay, if it shows out anything, okay, it shows tropical storm, yeah, but one of the weirdest tropical cyclone, it is sort of tropical cyclone, but one of the weirdest tropical cyclone, let's call it tropical cyclone, that there is, because technically it was a monsoon typhoon, which doesn't really make any sense, because monsoon being influenced by the monsoonal flow, like you have your monsoonal tropical depression, except the winds, at least by observationally, had around 65 knots in them. So it was a very strange hybrid blob that had very high winds for a very non-linear, not really tropical cyclone structure. And so it was one of those weird ones where it was at the time briefly called a monsoonal typhoon, and then it sort of became a low pressure area. So it was more so a low pressure area with very high winds. So again, one of the weirdest tropical cyclone related, let's just call it tropical cyclones that you'll see in any basin, or at least the Western Pacific, at least Cimarron, 95W, 97W, Julian, Jebi. They all recurve, I believe. Typhoon, yeah, there we go, another big tropical cyclone, which I believe again reached 140 knots, category 5, as it approached as a storm just north of Luzon in the Babuyan Islands. And it made a rare weakening landfall, at least it was initially predicted to be around like category 3 potentially, but now it weakened quite considerably. But it made a rare landfall in the southwest corner, which rarely ever sees tropical cyclone landfalls. It's not really a common approach angle, and so it weakened pretty much on impact, dissipated, lost all its convection. 21W as well. A lot of tropical cyclones that don't have names. They could have got names, which would have made it. Now this one got names, but in general, there's a lot of tropical cyclones that don't get names, which kind of confuses the idea of whether the season was actually above average. And the season was technically, I'm pretty sure it was below average. But if you name them all, it might have reached average. Like last season was average as well. But I think if they named it, it would have been technically above average. But that's the thing, tropical cyclone in Western Pacific particularly, you have a lot of years that have like 28 tropical cyclones that are named, and like 42, 48 overall in the basin. So there's way more in the basin. The actual like because of this, the climatological average has a lot more tropical cyclones that just occur than the actual names. So you would expect that. It's a bit strange, but it does occur. And so the actual above average and what average is measured against the named cyclones, which is expected to be like above average this year, which is one of the first years to be above average in like 6 years or something, or like 7 even. And then there's Trami as well, Typhoon Trami, I believe it re-intensified in South China Sea. I'm not sure what the official bulletin has. It occurred during Kong Ray, so that I didn't really think about it too much, but yeah, it re-intensified in the South China Sea quite impressively. But it was obviously very impactful. And the thing with Philippines impacts nowadays is that a lot of people are prepared for high intensity landfalls. They make evacuation like absolutely massive, colossal, comparable to the North Indian Ocean evacuations. They were prepared for it. Like Mangkut, they were prepared for it. But Mangkut, they were sort of prepared for it. That's not an example. I was thinking Manyu. When tropical storm landfalls, there's no preparation. Right, we continue. Kong Ray. They do have an official bulletin for it, Category 5. Weakens into Category 3 and then Category 1 on the other side. Broadens out the circulation. Weakens in now early November phase. Always early November is an interesting time frame, and of course this was a very historic time frame. 2024 season, we had Nxthan, which made a category, well, intensified to a high-end category for 235 knots roughly. Made some landfalls, of course, very rural sort of impacts in the northern Luzon area. So it's obviously like the typhoon and tropical cyclone sort of capital in the world, but the landfall area, especially in the northern areas, can be very isolated. So luckily, not as much as an impact, but of course they still do occur. Taraji, which intensified to roughly category 2 cyclone by my reanalysis, and then of course Nxthan re-intensified to category 3 peak, and then it moves southwestwards and weakened. Yagi became a category 5, of course. Actually, yeah, and the official bulletin is like really off for Yagi. It's one of the, let's just say, the most separated to the official, like at least the official to the reanalysis, because my analysis is about 155 knots, which is 180 miles per hour, even though I don't use that conversion. But of course the official bulletin is like completely off, so it's not even near. And of course then we had 2 category 5s right back to back after each other. There's a sequence that's almost identical to the 2006 sequence. If you remember, like Chevy, and then you had Durian, like those sort of tropical cyclones. I think was it Sulu. I don't know if there was that tropical cyclone. I don't think there was that one, but there was a lot of different other impacts, and of course that was a very historic phase. So it's not as common, but it does occur. Category 5, and I believe made a category 5 landfall. Yeah, here actually they don't have. Yeah, they have the category 4 landfall here. So category 5 landfall. It's a lot of interesting stats with Manji, because it made a category 5 landfall. At least that's the idea that it made category 5 landfall. I believe was it Legazpi, or the island near it, Samar. I think it's one of them. Might be Samar Island. And then it made on mainland Luzon, actually going quite close. It was initially think to be quite close to the actual NCR, the actual Philippines capital region, but then it moved slightly northeast, but it's still an impactful area. And landfall data, at least by observations, was around 950 millibars or 935. Very high millibar value, but the observations suggested at least around 130 knots of landfall intensity, which is much higher. And that's the thing with tropical cyclones, is that it's been discovered a lot more nowadays, that tropical cyclones often, particularly with land masses that are very different than just flat flat air land masses, because that's not very that common actually. Because we often think about like Florida and stuff, but it's not that common. But often you get a lot of tropical cyclones with a much higher pressure than the intensity. So that misleads people into the intensity, but it's a real thing. And of course we've seen it with Manu, and probably the best data set and most clear as possible. And so it does occur because with a lot of areas, like with Hainan Island, it's quite flat, and so the landfall pressure was not as high for Yagi, even though the intensity was around 130 knots. I believe, yeah, that was around the observational point. So it's interesting. Also with the Yagi, with some tropical cyclones, especially with the CWA, there's some that you get, including last year, you get some recon data with them. I believe they had like 115 knots, which is pre-first Category 5 update. So they had a recon with them. Of course, they have a couple of, like last year, they infamously had like, at least people who know, at least pay attention, like the TLC and etc. Flight radar. There was New Guri just after it made its Category 5 peak. And of course, it then it was a Category 5 at the, not Category 5, Category 4 at the same latitude as Hokkaido, which is obviously incredibly rare. It's pretty much of its own kind. It's sort of being compared to the Atlantic. In fact, I think it's more impressive than the Atlantic. And I think they might have actually gone error here because they put S rather than N for the latitudes. But around 42, 43 degrees north, very high latitude, it still was a Category 4. And of course it weakened after that, but it still reached, it was almost a typhoon at like, well, this is even a tropical storm at like 50 degrees, which is north, which is that's crazy to think about, especially for the Western Pacific in particular. But of course, the main point here was about the pressure relationship with Manu, and of course now it's weakening. And a lot of tropical cyclones that weaken, especially because in early seasons as well, but later seasons, particularly like November, when the tropical cyclone weakens, it moves southwestwards towards Vietnam and weakens. It's occurred a couple of times actually, but the idea is obviously the low level circulation is drifting south. The shear tears apart the remaining of the mid level circulation, which is disjointed, and then you have this. It just follows the flow pattern. It just moves that way and of course you get the monsoonal flow as well. So it's sort of just quite erratic, but the common trend is just moving southwestwards, remnant low sort of tropical cyclone. It still can produce a lot. It will at least enhance the rainfall. We've seen this effect actually with remnant lows that become an MCV. Like if you remember Tropical Storm Barry last year, which actually was a major influence in the Texas, at least the Texas hill floods within the Guadalupe River, and there was the Kerr River, there was the Kerrville as well. Of course, big influence. It caused massive amounts of rainfall, and it wasn't really appreciated previously. I forgot 96W. 96W was very equatorial, very close actually. Caribbean, yeah, of course. Caribbean, and it's so close actually. It's within 3 degrees north. Like if you just look at that compared to the southern tip, like at least compared to Davao and then southern Mindanao, you see how far south that is. Very far south. And we had Romina as well. I think I remember Romina more. But then it's because it became Pabuk. Pabuk, I think last year in 2019 also, the previous time it was used, it also was one of the last tropical cyclones moving southwest. So interesting season. A crazy season actually at that. 4 typhoons at the same time. It's absolutely crazy. 208 A's, not that high, but still very interesting. Typhoon Yagi. And I personally believe Category 4 landfalls rather than 3 and 4. That's just the official JWC bulletin. That's being regurgitated. Luzon was absolute typhoon capital in the season. It's very interesting to see because it doesn't really even occur that often to see an actual Visayas landfall. So seeing Mangi make a Category 5, at least I believe so, it's Category 5 landfall on one of the Visayas regions. So it's very interesting. You don't get to see that often. At least I feel like in recent years it's not occurred enough. And of course, Yagi was very influential. I think it appears that they updated the fatality count. There's now over 1,000, which is crazy because before it was stagnant around 835 or something for quite a long time. Of course, a lot of people knew, at least I knew when I was tracking it. A lot of people that I was talking to, they probably know as well. I believe there was a very high tropical cyclone impact and fatality. You can see the intensities here. These are all pretty much JTWC based, which is not the best. Let's just stick to while I'm gonna give my reanalysis because I'm not gonna talk too much about it because they're often off is the best way to say it. They're not very accurate. Ofel, of course, is very infamous. And yeah, apparently now over 1,127 fatalities reported, which is crazy high. Trami was a weak tropical cyclone again caused very high amounts of fatalities. Like Tropical Storm Meggy for 2022 was underestimated and caused huge fatalities. That's kind of annoying. That was the reason for the cyclone being retired rather than the 2010 one. And Nxthan with the most ace here, was crazy because like these all like 20, 25. This season alone already has had several tropical cyclones. This year already around like over 60 ace with just one tropical cyclone and around over 50-ish, and now another one which is about to produce over 60. We've had already more ace in this year, pretty much like almost summating the entire ace of that season, which had very big TCs. They intensified and they were not very long tracked. You can see how close they were to the landmasses before impact. And in the South China Sea, it's quite hard for tropical cyclone to generate a huge amount of ace. Yagi might at least still managed to produce 21 ace in the time frame there was in the South China Sea, which was primarily obviously the South China Sea, the most intense South China Sea tropical cyclone. And this year is much more different than that. It's actually Super El Nino sort of year, so you've got way far east tropical cyclones. So, interesting variations and gamey as well. A lot of late tropical cyclone impacts, which is interesting way. You could probably word it some other way, but that's the way it is. I think that's a really good animation overall, though. Of course, I sort of slowed it down and paused it all, which is probably better to just advertise it and just say to watch it yourself. But that's what I'll do. I'll see you in the next video.